Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. Today, we're diving into a topic that's been making headlines and sparking a lot of conversation, toxic work culture in India. And we're going to be focusing specifically on the tragic story of Anna Sebastian Peril.
Yeah.
A young chartered accountant who unfortunately passed away just a few months after beginning her dream job.
Right.
At Ernst Young in Pune, India.
Yeah. It's a really heartbreaking story, but also a really important one, I think, to dive into, because it exposes a lot of these larger issues that are kind of bubbling under the surface.
Yeah, exactly. And, we've got some really compelling sources to pull from today, including a letter from Anna's mother to the chairman of EY India.
Right.
Which really kind of puts this whole issue into a very human perspective, I think.
Yeah.
And we're also going to be looking at some, perspectives from some pretty prominent Indian tech billionaires. Some of whom have actually come out and advocated for a 70-hour work week.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to be exploring that as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, really the goal today is to kind of unpack the complexities of India's work culture.
Yeah.
Understand why people might stay in these toxic jobs.
Right.
And, ultimately what can be done about it.
Yeah, I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with, around the world, right? Toxic work environments.
Absolutely.
But it seems like, India especially has been in the news a lot lately for this.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start by kind of setting the stage with Anna's story.
Yeah.
So she was a brilliant young woman.
Okay.
Super excited to start her career at EY, like I said, as her dream job.
Right.
And in the beginning, things seemed to be going well.
Okay.
But then very quickly, her health started to deteriorate. And just 4 months after joining the company, she was found dead in her apartment.
Oh, wow.
And her mother's letter, really paints a very vivid picture of the immense pressure that Anna was under.
Right.
She talks about, Anna working really long hours, being swamped with work. Pushed to meet these crazy deadlines and even, being told to work through the night.
Wow.
And what's even more concerning is that when Anna tried to raise concerns about the workload, it seems like her concerns were just kind of brushed aside.
Wow. So she's basically stuck in the situation, right? Like she's being told she has to do all this work.
Yeah, it's really tragic. And unfortunately, Anna's story is not an isolated incident.
Right.
And it really speaks to this, larger trend of burnout and distress.
Yeah.
Among Indian employees. And there was a recent survey by the McKinsey Health Institute.
Okay.
That found that a staggering 40%
wow.
of Indian employees are experiencing symptoms of burnout, distress, or even depression.
Yeah.
Largely due to toxic work environments.
Right. And that's huge. 40%.
A huge number, and that's significantly higher than the global average.
It makes you wonder, what are the factors that are contributing to this, right? Why is it so much higher in India?
Well, that's what we're going to try to unpack. I think there are a lot of factors at play here.
Yeah.
One of them, I think, is this intense pressure to succeed. India has a very competitive job market.
Right.
And there's this kind of cultural expectation that you have to really push yourself to the limit to get ahead.
Okay, so you're saying there's almost like a cultural element to this as well.
Yeah, I think so. And then you also have the fact that India's unemployment rate is quite high.
Right.
It's around 8%.
Okay.
And that, obviously creates a lot of pressure for people to hold on to their jobs.
Yeah.
Even if those jobs are making them miserable.
Right. It's like, if I quit,
what
are the chances I'm going to find another job, right?
Exactly. And I think that fear of losing your job can be really paralyzing.
Right.
And it can make it really difficult to speak up or to set boundaries.
Absolutely. And, even if people do want to speak up, there's also the question of do they have any legal protections, right? Are there strong labor laws in India that protect employees?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think we'll get into that a bit more later on.
Okay.
But it's definitely a factor to consider because if there aren't those protections in place,
right,
it makes it even harder for people to push back against these toxic behaviors.
Absolutely.
So we've got this, intense pressure to succeed, fear of losing your job.
Yeah.
And then you also have, some high-profile figures in India who are actually advocating for longer work weeks.
Really?
Yeah, so like Narayan Murthy, who's the co-founder of Infosys, he's actually come out and said that he believes that Indians should be working up to 70 hours a week.
Wow.
In order to boost the country's productivity.
So he's basically saying that the key to success is just working more hours.
Yeah, that seems to be his argument.
Okay, I'm curious to hear more about what the reasoning behind that is.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that. But I mean, it's a pretty controversial stance,
Yeah, I can imagine.
to say the least.
70 hours a week, that's like almost double a normal work week, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. And there's actually a lot of evidence
Okay.
to suggest that that's actually not the best approach for productivity.
Really?
Yeah. There are a lot of studies that show that shorter work weeks with a greater focus on work-life balance can actually lead to increased productivity.
That's interesting because I think, there's this common misconception that the more hours you work, the more productive you'll be.
Right.
But it sounds like that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and we see examples of this all over the world, like countries like Luxembourg
Okay.
have really strict limits on working hours, very generous vacation policies.
Okay.
And yet they consistently rank among the most productive and happiest nations in the world.
That's a great point. I mean, it really challenges that assumption that we have to work ourselves to the bone to be successful.
Exactly. It's really about working smarter, not harder.
Right.
And, creating an environment where people feel supported and valued, and they're able to, bring their best selves to work.
Absolutely. I think that's a key part of it, right? Like if you're constantly stressed and overworked, you're not going to be able to do your best work.
Exactly. And so going back to Anna's story, her mom's letter really highlights this culture where overwork is almost expected.
Yeah.
It's celebrated, and there's this sense that you have to constantly prove yourself, go above and beyond, never say no.
Right.
Even if it means sacrificing your health and well-being.
It's like this toxic hustle culture, right? Like you always have to be on, you always have to be working.
Exactly. And Anna's mom, in her letter, she actually urges EY to attend the funerals of their employees who die while working for them.
Wow.
Which they didn't do for Anna.
Oh, wow.
And she highlights this as kind of a symbol of their lack of empathy.
Yeah, that's powerful.
She's saying, they need to take responsibility for creating a healthier work environment,
right?
A more humane work environment.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really stark reminder that behind all these statistics and these discussions about productivity, there are real people who are being affected by this.
Absolutely. And so I think the question that we need to explore now is why don't people like Anna just quit if they're so unhappy?
Yeah, right? It seems like an obvious solution, but I'm sure there are a lot of factors that make it more complicated than that.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
Yes.
So we were talking about, why people don't just quit these toxic jobs.
Right.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really complex issue with a lot of different factors at play.
Absolutely.
And I think for a lot of people, it comes down to this kind of complicated mix of fear and hope. On the one hand, you have that fear of losing your job.
Right.
Especially in a country like India where unemployment is high and the job market is so competitive.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you also have this hope that maybe things will get better.
Right.
Maybe the workload will ease up. Maybe your manager will change. Maybe you'll get transferred to a different team.
Or maybe you'll finally get that promotion.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of hold on to that hope and you convince yourself that it's worth putting up with the bad stuff.
Right. Because the alternative is just too scary to even contemplate.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy for us to sit here and say, well, just quit your job.
Right.
But it's not that simple.
Yeah. And, I think there's also this cultural element to it as well.
Okay.
In India, there's a strong emphasis on loyalty and respect for authority.
Right.
And so it can be really difficult to speak up against your boss or to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And, even if you do speak up, there's no guarantee that anything will change.
Right. And you could even risk making things worse for yourself.
Exactly. And so a lot of people just kind of end up suffering in silence.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Anna's story so tragic. She was clearly struggling.
Yeah.
But it seems like she didn't feel like she had any other options.
Right, she felt trapped.
Yeah. And, her mom's letter really underscores this sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
I mean, she talks about how she tried to encourage Anna to push back against the unreasonable demands. But Anna felt like she couldn't.
Right. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, quitting isn't always a viable option.
Right.
And so we need to start looking at other solutions.
Yeah. Like what can be done to actually address the root causes of this problem?
Exactly. And I think, one of the most important things is raising awareness.
Okay.
We need to start talking about this issue more openly.
Yeah.
And we need to challenge the cultural norms that contribute to this toxic work culture.
Right, because it's not just about individual companies or managers. It's about a larger societal problem.
Absolutely. And we need to start holding companies accountable for creating these toxic environments.
Right. I mean, they have a responsibility to their employees.
Absolutely. And, there are things that companies can do to create healthier workplaces.
Like what kind of things?
Well, they can start by setting realistic expectations for workloads.
Okay.
They can encourage employees to take breaks.
Right.
They can provide training on stress management and work-life balance. They can create a culture of open communication.
Yeah.
Where employees feel comfortable speaking up about their concerns.
Absolutely. And they can also make sure that there are clear policies in place.
Right.
To address issues like bullying and harassment.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to recognize that, not everyone thrives in a traditional 9-to-5 office environment. And so maybe we need to start thinking about alternative career paths.
Okay.
Maybe freelancing or entrepreneurship might be a better fit for some people.
That's a good point. I mean, it gives people more flexibility and control over their work schedule.
Exactly. And so I think it's about, giving people more choices.
Yeah.
And empowering them to find a work situation that's right for them.
Right, because ultimately it's about finding that balance, right, between work and life.
Absolutely. And creating a society where people feel valued and respected.
Yeah.
And they're able to live fulfilling lives.
Yeah, I think that's what we should all be striving for.
Okay, so I think that's a good segue into the next section of Anna's mom's letter.
Okay.
Where she describes the circumstances surrounding Anna's death.
Yeah.
And it's really heartbreaking stuff. But I think it's important for us to hear it.
Yeah, I agree.
So she writes, on Saturday, July 6th, my husband and I reached Pune to attend Anna's CA convocation. Since she had been complaining of chest constriction upon reaching her PG late at night around 1 a.m. For the past week, we took her to the hospital in Pune.
Oh, wow. So she was already experiencing physical symptoms.
Yeah. And she goes on to say her ECG was normal, and the cardiologist came to allay our fears.
Okay.
Telling us she wasn't getting enough sleep and was eating very late.
Right.
He prescribed antacids, which reassured us that it wasn't anything serious.
And it's interesting how, sometimes we dismiss these physical symptoms as just being stressed out or tired.
Right.
But it's important to remember that stress can manifest in very real physical ways.
Yeah, and sometimes those physical symptoms can be a sign of something more serious.
Exactly. So it's always important to listen to your body.
Yeah, and to seek medical attention if you're experiencing any unusual or persistent symptoms.
Right.
So Anna's mom goes on to describe how, even though they had come all the way from Kochi, Anna insisted on going to work after seeing the doctor.
Really?
Yeah, she said there was a lot of work to be done, and she would need to leave.
Wow. So even though she's experiencing chest pain, she still feels this pressure to go to work.
Yeah, and, it's tragic because this was supposed to be a really special time for Anna and her family.
Right, her convict.
Yeah, she had worked so hard to become a chartered accountant. And she was so excited to celebrate this achievement with her parents.
Yeah.
And, her mom even mentions that Anna had booked their flight tickets and everything.
Oh, wow.
So that they could be there with her for this special occasion.
It's just devastating to think that she felt like she couldn't even take a day off to celebrate this huge accomplishment.
Yeah, and, it really highlights how this culture of overwork can rob us of these precious moments.
Right.
These moments that we should be spending with our loved ones.
That's
and
true.
Celebrating our successes.
Yeah, and it's not just about the big moments either.
Right.
It's about the everyday moments.
Yeah.
The dinners with your family, the weekends with your friends, the time that you spend relaxing and recharging.
Absolutely.
And when you're constantly working, you're missing out on all of that.
Yeah, and you're also putting your health at risk.
Right. I mean, we've already talked about the physical effects of stress, but there are also the mental and emotional effects.
Right.
Burnout, anxiety, depression.
And those can be just as damaging, if not more so.
Absolutely. So it's really important to prioritize your well-being.
Yeah, and to recognize that, your worth is not tied to your job.
Right. You are more than your job.
Exactly. And so I think, Anna's story is a really powerful reminder of that.
Yeah.
And I hope that it will inspire people to start demanding better themselves.
Yeah, we deserve to work in environments that are healthy and supportive.
Absolutely. And we deserve to have lives outside of work.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the specific things that companies can do to create these healthier work environments.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
So we've been talking about, what companies can do to create these healthier work environments.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to talk about what individuals can do if they find themselves in a toxic situation.
Yeah, because ultimately, we can't always rely on companies to do the right thing. So we need to be empowered to advocate for ourselves.
Exactly. And, the first step is really just recognizing that you're in a toxic environment.
Okay.
Because sometimes it can be hard to tell.
Right, especially if you've been in that environment for a long time.
Yeah, you kind of get used to it.
Yeah, it becomes normalized.
Exactly. And so it's important to kind of step back and ask yourself, is this a healthy place for me to be?
Yeah, are my needs being met?
Right.
Am I being treated with respect?
Exactly. And, if the answer is no,
Yeah.
then it's time to start thinking about what you can do to change the situation.
Okay, so what are some of the things that people can do?
Well, one of the most important things is to document everything.
Okay.
Keep a detailed record of any incidents, conversations, emails, anything that demonstrates the toxic behavior.
Dates, times, specific quotes.
Exactly, because if you ever need to take action,
Right.
you'll have that evidence to back you up.
So it's not about being paranoid.
Right.
It's about protecting yourself.
Exactly. And, another important thing is to build a support system outside of work.
Yeah.
Talk to trusted friends, family members, a therapist, anyone who can provide you with an objective perspective.
Right. Because when you're in the thick of it,
Yeah.
it can be hard to see things clearly.
Exactly. And, sometimes just talking about it
Yeah.
can help you to process what's happening.
And to realize that you're not alone.
Right.
And that it's not your fault.
Exactly. And once you've kind of got that support system in place, you
Yeah.
can start thinking about whether or not you want to address the issue directly with your manager or HR.
Okay. And that could be a really tough decision.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely not always the right approach.
Right.
But sometimes it can be effective.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a good relationship with your manager.
Right. Or if the company has a strong culture of open communication.
Exactly. And, if you do decide to go that route,
Yeah.
it's important to be prepared,
Okay.
and then think about what you want to say and focus on specific examples.
Right.
And, stay calm and professional.
Okay. And what if that doesn't work?
Well, if you've tried to address the issue internally and nothing has changed,
Yeah.
then you might need to consider escalating the issue
Okay.
to higher management or even external authorities.
So like a labor board or something like that.
Exactly. And, I know that can sound really daunting,
Yeah.
but it's important to remember that you have rights
Right.
and you don't have to put up with being treated unfairly.
And there are resources available to help you if you need to take legal action.
Right. And, even if you don't end up taking legal action, just knowing your rights can give you a sense of empowerment.
Right. It's about knowing that you have options.
Exactly. And, I think it's also important to acknowledge that sometimes the best option is to simply leave.
Right.
I know that's not always easy.
Especially in a tough job market.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's the healthiest thing you can do.
Absolutely. And, I think Anna's story is a really tragic reminder of that.
Yeah.
She stayed in a situation that was clearly making her unhappy. And ultimately, it cost her her life.
Yeah. And so I think, if you're in a toxic job and you've tried everything you can to change it
Yeah.
and it's still not working,
Right.
then maybe it's time to move on.
Absolutely. And, there's no shame in that.
Right.
Sometimes leaving is the bravest thing you can do.
Yeah, it's about prioritizing your own well-being.
Exactly. And, I think that's really what Anna's mom is trying to convey in her letter. She wants other young people to learn from her daughter's experience.
Right.
And to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah, she doesn't want anyone else to have to go through what her family went through.
Exactly. And so I think, that's a really powerful message.
Yeah, and I think it's a message that we all need to hear.
Right.
Because, it's easy to get caught up in the hustle culture.
Yeah. And to think that we have to sacrifice everything.
To succeed.
But that's not true.
Yeah.
We deserve to have lives outside of work.
Absolutely.
And we deserve to be treated with respect.
And we deserve to be happy.
Exactly. And so I think, that's really the takeaway from this deep dive.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that we have a choice.
Right.
We can choose to stay in a toxic environment or we can choose to leave.
And, we can choose to speak up.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to stay silent.
But ultimately, the decision is ours.
And we need to make the decision that's best for us.
Absolutely. And so I think, that's a good place to end our deep dive.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for joining me today.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for listening.
Yeah. Thank you for being here.
And, we hope that this conversation has been helpful.
Right.
And that it's given you some food for thought.
Yeah. And if you have any thoughts or experiences that you want to share, please feel free to reach out to us.
We'd love to hear from you. Absolutely.
So until next time, take care of yourselves.
And each other.
And we'll see you on the next Deep Dive.